What was to follow was a battle that would become the rallying cry for the cause of the Highlanders, Prestonpans. The battle at Prestonpans would last scarcely 10 minutes, but would go down as one of the most decisive defeats in English military history. After firing just one ragged volley, Charles' troops spontaneously surged forward without command, swinging their claymores and Lochaber axes. It seemed as though they were guided and shielded by the hand of Providence. Unprepared for the riotous charge and lacking motivation and leadership, the shocked English soldiers dropped their flintlock muskets, deserted their cannons, and in the words of Bonnie Prince Charlie, ran like rabbits. The kilted warriors overwhelmed the green English troops and cut through them like a scythe through oats, hacking and slashing like medieval warriors. In the end, while only a scattering of clansmen had fallen, the field was strewn with the bodies of hundreds of English troops.
I must say, at the time, it was quite a shock to us that Cope tucked tail and ran. While the king's ministers panicked, young men of courage like myself hoped for the day when we would right the dishonor that Cope had brought upon us. The Pretender, fortunately, drenched in a bath of his own ego, triumphantly marched back to Edinburgh, where he sat for the month of October and played host to the young ladies of that town, and involved himself in every sort of bacchanalia, while he cavorted beneath the skirts and drowned himself in Madeira and champagne. We prepared to thrash him. The king recalled several battalions of troops from the continent, along with the Duke of Cumberland. We were the sons of Mars, while the Pretender played footman to Aphrodite. 'Twas in November that he gave up the petticoats and started south. Can you imagine, Jack, the sheer arrogance to think that he could invade England with 5,000 barefoot swordsmen?
It was near 20 years ago, so Prestonpans is a wee misty. We lined up in the dark, you ken, and charged at first light. I remember the Lochiel led us Camerons. I swung my sword like the rest, and I remember for certain I laid one of the Sassenach bastards open like a ripe melon, and then I recollect they broke and ran, and we gave chase, and then the English threw down their arms and begged mercy. We give it. Cheerlock, I heard, lamented the slaughter of the English dogs. He said they too were his subjects. For myself, I finally thought we were rid of German Geordie.
With the capture of Edinburgh and the decisive victory at Prestonpans, the Bonnie Prince was now more than a pretender. He was a dangerous threat to the Hanoverian dynasty of George II, and the way southward toward England lay open before his Highland forces.
We'd assembled 30,000 men to call it the Pretender. We divided them into 3 separate armies. I was with Wade, coming northwest out of Northumberland. The Pretender never got closer than 130 miles of London. The hounds were on Bonnie Charlie's tail. I must say, we should have had him at that point, but the fox slipped back into his lair.
The Jacobite army at best numbered no more than 5,500 men during the invasion of England, and as they neared London and left Scotland farther behind, desertions began to rise. The Pretender had successfully dodged the 3 forces attempting to bring him to bay, and London lay a scant week's march ahead. In London all was topsy-turvy as the government prepared to flee. If ever Charles had had a chance, this was it. With desertions running high, it was feared that the army would number no more than perhaps 4,000 by the time they reached striking distance of London. It would take a bold stroke and fearlessness bordering on madness to continue.
I tell you, it was bitter. And I was hungry a bit. We had oats so we didn't starve. But my belly was starting to knuck on my backbone. The lairds and chiefs were always bickering about which way to go. My kilt was never dry, and my sword and such were in sore need of a polishing. The lads were all for taking London, but the prince would listen to nothing but Mary's whispering that it was too risky. Laird Mary was a fighter, but like my cousin Malcolm used to say, he could be a bit of an old woman. We knew this was near the time. We turned tail and headed for the Highlands. It was a shameful day, and I'll never forget that when we crossed the River Esk, we were finally back on Scottish soil.
The Pretender's ranks swelled with more traitors. Spies in the Highlands reported that he had over 8,000 men. General Hawley challenged the rebels in January of '46 at Falkirk. The young Pretender raced to meet him. At least it was not the total rout that Cope had achieved, but it did little to lift the spirits of those of us who only wanted to see Scots blood on our blades, and Britain once again at peace. I'll tell you, Jack, one cannot wage war with an olive branch.
General Hawley was the supreme British commander at Falkirk, where 350 years earlier, a Scots army led by Sir William Wallace was defeated by the English King Edward. Hawley had learned nothing from Cope's defeat at Prestonpans, and again the English broke before the Highland charge. It was now January 1746, and this time the Scots were victorious. This resulted in the king's decision to place his son, William Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland, in charge of the English forces. The young Pretender now faced a methodical and implacable foe.
Sassenach bastards held Stirling Castle. Turlock, I suppose, decided to rid himself of them, so he marched north. We had more of the clans then. I've heard tell they were 8,000. The camps were quite merry. We always had oats, and perhaps a bit of mutton or beef, or one of the lads would snare a rabbit, and there always was a fiddler to play us a tune. We laid siege to Stirling Castle, which was not to my liking. Most of us preferred an enemy that would close with bare steel. The English General Hawley obliged us, and so we left off the siege and met him at Falkirk, where the Sassenach fought William Wallace in olden times. At times I felt sorry for the English soldiers. Their generals didn't seem to learn. We charged and they ran. I didn't stick anyone at Falkirk. I twisted my ankle in a rabbit hole. My cousin Malcolm had to help me hobble home. But the Luckill knew we'd be back. It was that way with our people. Trust and honour.
For 2 months, Charles wended his way north toward the Highland capital of Inverness. Cumberland, a supreme English commander, drilled his troops in preparation for battle. He realized that in order to defeat the Scots, his men must have an advantage over the claymore swords and polearms of Charles' savage shock troops. The bayonet was the key to unlocking and securing a British victory. Cumberland had drilled his men to maintain their ranks and stagger their fire, so that the Highlanders would always be facing loaded weapons. Should the Scots manage to gain the English front rank and engage them in hand-to-hand, rather than engaging the man directly in front, as was the practice, the English infantryman was to drive his bayonet into the Highlander to his right and rely on his comrade to the left to dispatch the man to his front, thus threading the gap between the Scottish shield and the Highlander's left-hand ribs. In this way, the Highland tart or shield would be useless, and the Highlander dead or wounded before he could wield his awesome broadsword. It was a simple yet brilliant tactic that would leave the Scots impaled with British steel. Cumberland set off with 8,000 men and reached Nairn just east of Culloden on April 14th. Charles' tired and hungry troops reached Culloden Moor just east of Culloden House on April 15th. The two armies were separated by 8 miles.
Johnny.
Aye.
Should something happen to me, would you see to Peg and my boy?
Sure, Malcolm. Here's to King James and Sherlock.
Aye. The king over the water. Maybe once we've won him a kingdom, we'll see more of him in these parts.
Dinna let wee Duncan forget me.
Oh, he'll no forget you, you bastard. Drink. Shut your mush.
On the evening before the Battle of Culloden, the traitors had attempted a sneak attack on our camp. Of course, our sentries were ever vigilant, and when the Jacobites found us ready, they withdrew. The Duke was not one to let moss gather, and the next day we marched on them. And I tell you, Jack, that was the end of the Highland Rebellion.
Short of men, money, and supplies, Charles, goaded by his councillors and staff, decided to gamble. Lord George Murray again voiced his concern over fighting the English on flat, open ground, where they could effectively use their superior artillery and cavalry. Charles, short of both of these, planned his strategy once again around his fearless clansmen, and in one bold charge planned to break the English as he had at Prestonpans and Falkirk. Early on the morning of April 16th, 1746, Cumberland came to Charles. The lion had cornered the starving wolf.
I remember the cry going up. Camerons, rise up. Sons of the hounds, come here and get flesh. We formed with the other clans of the Athol Brigade and prepared our arms. I had but 2 rounds. One for my pistol and one for my musket. My sword and dirk were sharp enough to shave with. And I knew as long as I did not step in a rabbit hole, I'd have blood in my blade. We formed our lines and watched as the English displayed their troops and laid their great guns. We stood for over an hour while the English pounded us, and our iron cannon gave what reply they could. Finally, Sherlock could stand it no longer. He gave the order. We charged down the throat of the beastie.